The words cut across the sidewalk like broken glass. A dozen heads turned at once. It was a clear New York afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the trees lining the hotel entrance. The marble steps gleamed white. The revolving glass doors reflected the bustle of the avenue. And right there in front of the five-star Horizon Grand, Victoria Hale, the hotel's impeccably dressed director, pointed a manicured finger at a man who had just stepped out of a cab. Her voice didn't waver. It was sharp, confident, rehearsed. Guests on the steps froze mid-stride. A couple pushing a stroller stopped. A delivery biker slowed to watch. In that single accusation, she transformed an ordinary check-in into a public trial. David Carter didn't flinch. He stood with a small black carry-on at his side, dressed in a crisp white shirt and light chinos. Nothing flashy. No watch worth mentioning. No entourage. To anyone else, he looked like another traveler arriving for a stay. But the way he held himself, calm, steady, unhurried, hinted at something deeper. Victoria's red heels struck the marble like a gavel as she descended. "Sir, this hotel does not tolerate fraud. Hand over your belongings before we call security." A murmur rippled through the bystanders. Someone whispered, "Did he really steal?" A tourist raised her phone instinctively. The air around the hotel gates was no longer quiet. It was charged. David's eyes didn't leave Victoria's. His voice, low and even, carried across the crowd. "Do what you feel you need to." That restraint, that refusal to match her volume, made the tension heavier. A young woman near the curb lifted her phone higher, whispering into the camera, "This doesn't feel right." Others nodded quietly, the line between witness and participant beginning to blur. David Carter stood at the base of the marble steps, the carry-on still by his side, while Victoria Hale's accusation rippled outward like a shockwave. The doorman froze. A couple paused mid-stride with their suitcases. Even the pianist inside the lobby faltered for a second, a sour note drifting through the glass doors before the music stopped altogether. Victoria tilted her chin, lips curved in a tight smile. "You don't look like someone who belongs in a place like this," she said, her voice carrying to the people gathered on the sidewalk. A beat of silence followed. Then came the escalation. Ethan Wong, the young front desk clerk, hurried down the steps behind her. He held a clipboard tight against his chest, his expression a mix of nerves and duty. "Ma'am, should we check his bag?" Victoria snapped before he could finish. "Right now." Two uniformed guards flanked David, their shadows stretching long on the bright stone. One reached toward the zipper of the carry-on. David didn't move. He didn't resist. His gaze stayed fixed on Victoria, calm, composed. He'd seen this posture before, at 25, standing in another hotel lobby, told to leave because he didn't fit the profile. That memory pressed against the present, like a scar reopening. The guard hesitated under David's steady eyes. The crowd around them murmured louder. A woman pushing a stroller whispered, "This isn't right." A delivery biker slowed to record on his phone. Sophie Delgado, a travel blogger, spoke louder now, her camera angled high. "He just got out of a cab. He hasn't even stepped inside yet. How can you accuse him of stealing?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this. He's not a guest here." She snatched the plastic key card from Ethan's clipboard, the one David had handed over at check-in minutes earlier, and held it up. "This is fake. We don't tolerate imposters." Gasps broke out across the crowd. Mr. Grant, a longtime VIP guest arriving from a black sedan, froze on the curb. His face tightened as recognition flickered. He didn't speak, not yet. But his silence spoke volumes. David finally broke his own. His voice was measured, almost too soft for the chaos around him. "You've made your decision already, haven't you?" Victoria smirked, triumphant in the court of public opinion she thought she controlled. "Security, escort him off our property." The guards stepped closer, phones lifted higher. What had begun as a simple arrival was no longer private. It was a spectacle, a street corner trial under the afternoon sun. And David Carter, silent until now, Let them think they were winning. Because storms, he knew, don't need to be chased. They come to you. The guards inched closer, boots scraping against the pale stone. Their presence wasn't subtle anymore. It was intimidation wrapped in protocol. Victoria's voice carried over them, sharp enough to slice through the summer air. Men like him think they can walk in here, flash a piece of plastic and pretend they belong. Not today. Her words landed like stones tossed into water. Each ripple spread across the crowd. A teenager leaned on his bike at the curb, muttering to his friend, "That's messed up." A middle-aged tourist clutched her shopping bags tighter, eyes narrowed at Victoria. And Sophie, phone still recording, said louder now, "He gave you ID. He gave you a card. And you're calling him a thief." Victoria turned her glare on Sophie. "Delete that video or I'll have our legal team contact you." Sophie didn't flinch. "It's already live." Her voice trembled but held firm. Ethan, the clerk, shifted uneasily. He'd worked here barely 2 years, but even he knew the card was real. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his eyes flicking from David to Victoria. His silence said enough. He was afraid. David remained still, his bag untouched. His gaze swept the onlookers, witnesses who had no idea who he really was, only that they were watching a man accused in the street like a criminal. Victoria stepped down one more stair, heels clicking like gunfire. She raised the keycard high for everyone to see. This is nothing but a prop. He doesn't have a room. He doesn't have a reservation. And if he doesn't leave right now, I will call the police. The threat hung in the air. A woman carrying groceries stopped dead on the sidewalk. "Police?" she asked, her voice echoing the disbelief of half the crowd. "For what?" Victoria snapped. "For trespassing. For attempted theft." The murmurs grew louder. Mr. Grant finally spoke, his deep voice carrying authority. "Victoria, slow down." His silver hair gleamed in the sunlight, his tailored suit marking him as one of the hotel's most loyal VIPs. "I've known this hotel for 20 years. I've never seen us treat someone like this." Victoria didn't blink. "With respect, Mr. Grant, this man is not who he pretends to be." David finally spoke again, his words slow, deliberate, measured. "I don't have to pretend." The crowd hushed, phones tilted closer, recording every syllable. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound, all edge and no warmth. "Then prove it. Open your bag, right here in front of everyone. Show us you're not hiding anything." The demand wasn't procedure, it was humiliation staged for an audience. David didn't move. He stood as if rooted to the marble steps themselves, silent but unyielding. And in that silence, the balance began to shift. Because nothing unnerves a crowd or an accuser like a man who refuses to bow to shame. Victoria Hale didn't wait for compliance. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed David's keycard onto the stone steps like it was trash. The plastic clattered against the marble, sliding to a stop at his shoes. "Worthless," she spat. "You don't have a room here. You don't even belong here." Gasps rose from the sidewalk. A woman whispered, "She really said that." A cluster of college kids on bikes stopped to watch, one muttering, "This is insane." Phones tilted higher, red recording lights glowing like quiet alarms. Ethan Wong bent toward the fallen keycard, but Victoria's glare froze him. "Leave it," she ordered. His hands shook as he straightened. He looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. David still hadn't moved. His calm was a counterweight to her fury. The crowd sensed it. The more she raised her voice, the more his silence pressed down like gravity. Then Victoria crossed the final line. She pulled out her phone, dialing quickly, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, this is Victoria Hale, director of the Horizon Grand. I have a suspected thief on our property. He's refusing to leave. Send units immediately." The words hit the crowd like cold rain. "Calling the cops for this?" a man shouted from the curb. "That's profiling." Someone else muttered in agreement. Sophie's livestream comments scrolled faster. "This is wrong. She's abusing her power. He's just standing there." Mr. Grant's jaw tightened, his voice low but cutting through. "Victoria, think very carefully," she snapped back without hesitation. "I'm not wrong. Look at him. Look at the bag. Does he look like a man with a penthouse reservation?" That was the moment David moved. Slowly, deliberately, he bent to pick up the discarded key card. He slipped it back, into his pocket, then reached for his phone. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't rush, he simply pressed one button and lifted it to his ear. On the other end, a clear voice answered immediately. "This is Nia." David's gaze stayed locked on Victoria. "It's happening. Activate internal protocol." The line crackled. Then Nia's tone sharpened. "Protocol active, sir. Logging the incident, recording timestamps, pulling compliance records now." The words weren't shouted, but they carried. The crowd stilled, sensing something had shifted. Even the guards hesitated, their hands lowering slightly. Victoria scoffed, dismissive. "You think calling a friend is going to save you?" David's eyes didn't leave hers. "No," he said, voice like steel under silk. "But it will save this moment for exactly what it is." The murmur of the crowd swelled. Phones tilted closer. And for the first time, Victoria's polished confidence cracked, just enough to show fear beneath the fire. The sidewalk was no longer just a thoroughfare. It had become a stage. Strangers who minutes ago were rushing to cabs or juggling grocery bags now stood shoulder to shoulder, their attention glued to the confrontation. Victoria straightened her blazer and tried to reassert control. "Everyone here is wasting their time. This man is a fraud. Security, remove him. Now." But the guards didn't move. Their eyes flicked to David, then to the phones recording every angle. One shifted his weight uneasily. The other folded his arms. That hesitation opened the door for the first crack in Victoria's authority. Sophie Delgado, still live streaming, raised her voice above the murmurs. "I saw him arrive. He just stepped out of a cab. He hasn't even gone inside. And you're calling him a thief? This is profiling, plain and simple." Her words found traction. The woman with the stroller pushed forward slightly, her voice steady. "I don't know this man, but I know injustice when I see it." She glanced down at her daughter, then back up at Victoria. "And I don't want her to grow up thinking this is normal." Gasps and nods spread through the crowd. Phones tilted higher, recording every face, every word. Mr. Grant finally stepped closer. "Victoria, enough," he said, his tone carrying decades of authority. "This is not how we treat people. Not in my hotel. Not in any hotel worth its name." For the first time, Victoria faltered. Her smile thinned, her eyes darting to the growing ring of witnesses. But she doubled down. "You're all being manipulated. He's lying. People like him always find ways to exploit the system." The phrase hung in the air. People like him. It was all the confirmation the crowd needed. A collective murmur turned into open disapproval. A man near the curb shouted, "You can't just say that." Another added, "She's out of line." Ethan Wong, the young clerk, finally broke. His voice cracked but carried. "I saw his name in the system this morning. Carter, penthouse suite. It's real." The crowd erupted. Gasps, affirmations, a chorus of, "There you go," and "So why is she lying?" Victoria spun toward Ethan, eyes blazing. "One more word from you and you're fired." But Ethan didn't back down this time. He stepped forward, standing nearer to David than to her. "Then fire me, but I won't lie for you." Phones zoomed in, capturing the moment the young employee chose truth over fear. David still hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved an inch. But in the silence that followed Ethan's stand, his presence loomed larger than Victoria's fury. The tide had turned. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides. And Victoria, in her heels and perfect hair, was suddenly the one standing on trial. Victoria Hale's polished mask finally cracked. Her cheeks flushed, a faint tremor in her jawline betraying the fury building underneath. She stepped down the last marble stair until she stood level with David Carter, her heels clacking sharp against the stone. "Enough of this circus," she snapped, voice rising. He's a fraud, and anyone defending him is complicit. Security, remove them both. She jabbed a finger toward Ethan Wong, but neither guard moved. One cleared his throat, the other shifted uncomfortably, their hands lingering uselessly at their belts. They weren't going to drag a calm guest into the street under the gaze of 24 recording phones. The crowd's response came quickly, emboldened by the hesitation. "Are you serious?" Someone shouted from the curb. "You're abusing your power." Another voice rang out. A woman in sunglasses raised her phone higher, narrating for her live audience. "The director of the Horizon Grand just tried to fire her own staff in public. This is insane." Victoria spun, pointing at the cluster of onlookers. "Stop recording. This is private property." But her words fell flat. They weren't in the lobby anymore. They were on the public sidewalk, and the witnesses weren't intimidated. If anything, her desperation only fed the spectacle. Mr. Grant shook his head slowly, his voice stern but calm. "Victoria, you've lost the room. Every word you've said is being documented. You need to stop before you destroy your own career." She whirled on him, eyes blazing. "My career? I've protected this hotel's reputation for years. I won't let it be ruined by some imposter pretending to be something he's not." That last line, imposter, landed heavy. The crowd groaned audibly. Someone muttered, "She's digging her own grave." Another laughed bitterly. Imagine humiliating a guest in broad daylight. David Carter remained unmoved, as steady as the stone beneath his shoes. His silence pressed heavier with every passing second. Then, finally, he lifted his phone again. "Nia," he said evenly, "log this moment. Every word." Through the speaker, his assistant's voice cut sharp and clear. "Logged, time-stamped and archived, sir." The crowd stirred, realizing this wasn't just a man defending himself. This was a man who had systems in place. Authority humming beneath the calm exterior. Victoria, rattled but unwilling to yield, crossed her arms tightly. "Log whatever you want. When the police arrive, you'll be in handcuffs, not me." But her voice no longer carried the weight it once had. The balance had shifted. She stood surrounded not by allies, but by witnesses, and every one of them was watching her unravel. And David Carter hadn't even raised his voice. The tension outside the Horizon Grand snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Victoria Hale, her face now flushed with anger, marched forward until she was nearly chest to chest with David Carter. She extended her hand without warning and grabbed the handle of his carry-on. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "You can't do that." Another voice chimed in, "That's illegal." Victoria yanked hard, her heels scraping against the marble step. "If you won't open it, I will," she hissed, tugging at the zipper. David didn't flinch. His hand remained at his side, his eyes steady on hers. "Take your hand off my property," he said, low and measured, every syllable cutting sharper than a shout. The crowd stirred, recording phones zooming in. A teenager on his bike muttered, "She's crazy." Sophie Delgado's voice rang out, streaming live. "The director of this hotel is physically grabbing a guest's bag right now. Everyone can see this." Victoria ignored them, pulling harder at the bag. But her performance no longer read as control. It read as desperation. Her designer bracelet clinked loudly into the microphone of someone's phone. A metallic reminder that every second was being immortalized online. Then a new voice cut through. Mr. Grant stepped forward, his voice commanding in its restraint. "Victoria, release that bag. Now." She spun on him, still gripping the handle. "Stay out of this, Mr. Grant. You're being deceived." But her voice cracked, betraying the first real sign of panic. The young mother with the stroller pushed closer, her tone trembling but resolute. "You don't put your hands on people like that. Not here. Not anywhere." Her daughter stared wide-eyed from the stroller, clutching a stuffed bear. And then Ethan Wong, the clerk who had been silent too long, moved. He stepped down the stairs, placing himself between Victoria and David. His voice shook, but it carried. "Let go, Director." His reservation is real. I saw it. I logged it myself. The words landed like thunder. Victoria's grip faltered, her hand trembling on the bag's handle. She yanked once more, weaker this time, then released it. Altogether. The bag dropped back to the stone with a dull thud. David bent down calmly, lifted the handle again, and brushed a speck of dust from its corner. His silence was heavier than any rebuke. Victoria looked around, but the faces staring back at her were no longer passive. They were hard, judgmental, unforgiving. And every phone lens reflected her unraveling. Still, she tried to recover, straightening her blazer, forcing her lips into a smirk. All of you think you've seen something real. You've seen nothing yet. When the police arrive, you'll understand. But no one believed her. Not anymore. The bag was back in David Carter's hand, steady and untouchable. He straightened slowly, his movements deliberate, as if even gravity had no authority over him. For the first time, he lifted his gaze from Victoria and turned to the crowd. The sunlight caught the edge of his face, and every phone locked onto him like a spotlight. "Enough," he said, just one word, but it cut cleaner than any outburst. Victoria flinched. The crowd hushed. He raised his phone again, pressing a single button. "Nia," his voice calm. "Escalate protocol. I want every word transcribed, every video mirrored, every witness documented." Her voice came back instantly. Firm, professional, undeniable. "Understood. System escalation engaged. Digital backup in progress. Legal team notified." The guards glanced at each other uneasily. The onlookers murmured. Even Mr. Grant's brows lifted slightly, sensing the shape of something much larger than a simple guest versus director dispute. Victoria tried to laugh, a brittle sound that cracked in her throat. "What are you doing? You think making a phone call makes you powerful?" David turned back to her. His tone never rose, but it carried, amplified by the silence around him. "This isn't a phone call. This is a record. And you've written every line yourself." The words landed like a verdict. Sophie's live stream chat exploded with comments. "Who is this guy?" "She's finished." "Protocol? That sounds corporate level." Victoria's smile faltered. She crossed her arms tightly, grasping for control. "You're bluffing. You're nothing but a guest who lied his way to a card." David's eyes didn't waver. "Then explain why the system already knows my name. Why my reservation is tagged with executive clearance, and why your threats are now archived across 3 servers in real time." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones tilted higher. Ethan nodded faintly, confirming what he'd seen that morning. "He's telling the truth," he said softly, but loud enough to carry. Victoria snapped. "Shut up, Ethan." But her voice no longer carried authority. It carried fear. David stepped forward, one measured pace up the marble stairs. The crowd seemed to lean with him as if the very air had shifted. "You've humiliated me in public. You've tried to strip me of dignity in front of strangers. And you thought my silence meant you were winning." He paused, letting the weight settle. "But silence isn't weakness. It's a warning." The crowd erupted. Gasps, cheers, the clicking of dozens of cameras. Victoria's eyes darted, searching for support. But all she saw were witnesses. Witnesses who no longer believed her. And David Carter, still calm, still collected, was no longer just defending himself. He was taking control. Victoria Hale's bravado was slipping fast. Her arms folded tighter, her eyes scanning the crowd for an ally. But all she found were strangers staring back, phones raised like glowing verdicts. David Carter stood one step above her now, the sun breaking through the trees and casting him in light. His silence stretched until it was unbearable. Then he spoke, low, steady, and final. "You want proof?" he said. "Here it is." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim, matte black wallet. From it, he slid a metal access card, sleek and embossed with a gold insignia no one in that crowd had ever seen. He held it up just long enough for the cameras to catch it, then pressed it against the glass sensor at the hotel's entrance. Beep. The doors unlocked instantly, glowing green. A ripple moved through the crowd. Ethan's jaw dropped. Sophie whispered into her phone, "Oh my God, that's executive clearance." David let the moment breathe, then slipped the card back into his wallet. His gaze never left Victoria. "You accused me of theft, of fraud, of being an imposter." He took another step upward, now towering over her. "But the truth is simple." He turned slightly. His words meant not just for her, but for every phone, every witness, every stranger watching in real time. "This hotel belongs to me." The words detonated across the sidewalk. Gasps erupted. Shouts overlapped. Sophie nearly dropped her phone as her live stream comments exploded. "Wait, he owns it?" Plot twist. She's done. Victoria staggered, her lips parting but no words forming. You can't." "Yes," David cut in smoothly. "I can. And I do. I built the Horizon Grand from the ground up. Every stone you stand on, every paycheck you've cashed, every guest you've turned away, it all runs through me." The crowd roared. Some clapping, some laughing in disbelief. A man at the curb shouted, "You called the owner a thief." Ethan lowered his head, relief flooding his face. Mr. Grant let out a slow exhale, like a puzzle had just snapped into place. Victoria's voice wavered, desperate. "No, this is a trick. You forged that card, you hacked." David's tone was a hammer. "Stop before you embarrass yourself further." He let the silence hang, heavy as stone. "You thought you could strip me of dignity with words. But dignity isn't yours to give or take, and now the world sees you for what you are." Every phone caught it. Every witness felt it. The balance of power had flipped irreversibly in a single declaration. And Victoria Hale, the woman who moments ago commanded the street, stood pale and cornered at the gates of a hotel she no longer controlled. The words hung in the air. "This hotel belongs to me," and the effect was immediate. The crowd erupted. Applause broke out from the sidewalk, scattered at first, then swelling into a wave. Some laughed in disbelief. Others shouted in vindication. A teenager spun his phone around to his own stunned face, yelling into his live stream, "He's the owner. She called the owner a thief." Ethan Wong's face drained of color. His clipboard nearly slipped from his grip. "Oh God," he whispered, knowing his silence had carried him too close to complicity. Still, relief flickered in his eyes. He had spoken up before it was too late. Mr. Grant gave a solemn nod, his voice steady. "I knew something was wrong the moment she opened her mouth. David Carter, I should have recognized you sooner." His admission spread like gasoline on the fire, confirming everything for the bystanders. Phones tilted higher, capturing every reaction. The travel blogger Sophie spun in a slow circle, her camera catching the sea of faces. "You're all seeing this," she narrated breathlessly. She humiliated the man who built this place. Victoria Hale looked around wildly. Her polished composure was gone. Her arms, once folded in confidence, now hung stiff at her sides. Color drained from her cheeks. She tried to speak, but nothing came. Just fragments, half-syllables drowned out by the roar of voices around her. The two guards, moments ago prepared to drag David away, lowered their hands and stepped back. One muttered under his breath, "We almost laid hands on the boss." The young mother pushed her stroller closer to the steps, clapping softly with one hand. "Show her," she said. "Show them all." Her daughter clapped too, mimicking her mother, the sound tiny but piercing. And in that moment, Victoria Hale wasn't the director of anything. She was a spectacle, recorded, condemned, cornered, while the man she tried to erase stood taller than ever, backed not by titles alone, but by the undeniable power of truth in the open air. The clapping died down just enough for David Carter's voice to carry. He stood on the marble steps, one hand still resting on the handle of his bag, the other holding his phone like a gavel. "Naya," he said evenly, never breaking eye contact with Victoria. "Initiate termination protocol." The line was crisp, unflinching. "Understood, sir." Confirm name. David's tone was ice. Victoria Hale. Effective immediately. A stunned hush fell over the crowd. Phones caught every word. Ethan froze, eyes wide, while the guard stepped back further, as if the air around David now carried an invisible barrier. Naya's voice came back loud enough for every microphone nearby to capture. Termination logged. Hale's credentials revoked. Her access to Horizon systems is permanently disabled. Right then, the phone on Victoria's wrist buzzed violently. She looked down in horror as her staff ID app flashed red. Access denied. The tiny sound of denial seemed louder than her voice had all day. Gasps rippled through the witnesses. A man near the curb whispered, "She just got fired in front of everyone." Another shouted, "Justice served." Victoria staggered back a step, her red heels wobbling against the marble. "You can't do this. Not here. Not like this." David's reply was calm, devastating in its restraint. "I just did." The words landed like a verdict. No raised tone, no theatrics, just finality. Sophie swung her camera back to her own face, her voice trembling with awe. He terminated her, live, in front of the entire block. Mr. Grant crossed his arms and shook his head, not in anger at David, but in disbelief at Victoria's downfall. "I warned you," he muttered. Victoria's hands shook, grasping for her phone as if she could undo the damage, but nothing worked. She was locked out, stripped of authority, powerless before the man she had accused only minutes earlier. David Carter stood tall, the sunlight framing him like a verdict from the sky itself. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the street was silent. Not out of fear, but out of respect. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound of traffic from the avenue seemed distant, muted, as if the entire city had paused to witness what had just unfolded on the marble steps of the Horizon Grand. David Carter let the silence breathe before he spoke. His words were calm, almost quiet, but every person heard them as if they were standing right beside him. "You thought silence meant weakness," he said, his gaze still locked on Victoria. "But silence was the test. And today, you failed." The crowd reacted instantly. Applause rose again, louder this time, echoing off the hotel's glass facade. Some cheered, others laughed in relief, and a few shook their heads in disbelief at how quickly power had shifted. Phones captured every angle, every clap, every look of vindication. Victoria stood frozen, her career ending in real time. Her authority evaporated under the bright afternoon sun. She tried to speak, but her voice broke, drowned out by the crowd's roar. She had become the cautionary tale in a story that was no longer hers to control. David adjusted the strap of his bag, then climbed the final steps. As the revolving glass doors opened with a soft whoosh, he turned back to the onlookers one last time. "I don't need a video to prove who I am," he said, his voice steady, resonant. "I am the result of it." The words landed like the closing line of a film. Phones caught the sentence, ready to travel across platforms, across cities, across the world. With that, David Carter stepped inside his own hotel. No longer a man under suspicion, but the undeniable owner, the leader, the one who had turned humiliation into judgment and silence into power. And outside, under the shade of the trees and the blaze of camera lights, justice felt not delayed, not debated, but delivered.